Well, good morning, everybody. It's good to be here today, and I'm going to have this weird sensation, or this weird thing about trying to stay out of the way of the camera so that I can actually see everybody in the room. But yeah, it's good. It's good to be here. My name is Jeremy Kaufman. I work for MHS Consulting. MHS Consulting is a wholly owned subsidiary of MHS, which would be the Anabaptist version of CHHSM. So there's obviously a long-standing relationship and history between the organizations, and Michael and our CEO, Karen Lehman, get together in that interfaith network group so often to talk about how to better support the organizations. And so it's just great to be here today. And the story about how I personally got to this gathering, which I love these kind of things. I'd much rather be in these small, intimate settings than these large gatherings that are a couple thousand people. How I got here was I went to Leading Age in Atlanta, and Karen, our CEO, said, you need to go to the Interfaith Breakfast because I'm not going to be at Leading Age. You need to represent MHS because they'll ask you to stand up and talk a little bit about what's going on in our world, and so you need to be the representative. And I said, okay, and I went, and that was the first chance I got to meet Michael. And I didn't get a chance to talk to him very much, but just a couple minutes. And then about 3 weeks later, I walk into our board meeting that we were having in Indianapolis for MHS. And I didn't, to be honest, full disclosure, I didn't really look at the packet before we got there. And I walk into the room and there's Michael. And Michael was invited to be a resource person to talk about the efforts at CHHSM and across the membership with about DEI. And so, right away learned that he was very impassioned about the subject and just was really doing some great work there. And so I wanted to learn more about CHHSM as he was talking, so I got on the website and I started looking around, and I realized there was this page where there was a number of consultants listed on the CHHSM website, and I thought, MHS isn't even listed on here. Come on, why are we not on CHHSM's website? We do consulting work. And so afterwards I was giving Michael a hard time about how do we get ourselves on your website for consulting work. And the next thing you know, I'm signing a form saying that we'll be a sponsor for this event.
That's how you get on the website.
That's how I got on the website. So we've heard lots of great things about Michael over the last few days. I have not heard that anybody talk about how great of a salesperson he is, but he's a great salesperson. And so it's an honor to be here, not only just because of the work that you guys are doing, similar work to our members, but just to be here for Michael's last event and to be part of listening to what you have all shared about what he's done for the organization and what you've done, what he's done for many of you personally. And so yeah, it's just an honor to be here. So we're going to talk a little bit about succession planning today, and most of us would think of succession planning at the CEO level, right? I mean, that's really where we talk mostly about it, and we will talk some specifics about how to plan for a CEO transition. And I know a number of you in the room are CEOs, and I'm imagining that you're thinking about when that transition might be for you. But we're also going to talk about transition planning as a strategy that can really and should really impact your whole organization. And I'm going to try to make a case for why that's really important, other than just at the executive level or at the C-suite level, that there's really some advantages to being able to do this up and down through your organization, right? And so, I love talking to people to hear their stories. I mean, Nikki's story today is just fascinating. I mean, it just blew me away in terms of listening to her at the beginning talk about her parents and how that shaped who she was. And so I want to tell you a story, or actually two short stories about myself, as a way to help you understand why I think this kind of work is really, really important. So how many of you, I'll start with a question, how many of you at 18 knew what you were going to do with your life? We're pretty sure. Okay? You did?
Oh, I knew. It's not what I'm doing.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Maybe that should be the follow-up question. Is those of you that knew, did you actually follow that plan? Well, I had to laugh when Nikki put that slide up on the screen with her 7th grade picture on it, because at the very bottom was that hashtag that said hot mess, right? That's how she would describe herself. At 19 years old, I was a hot mess as a kid. I had no idea what I wanted to do. I was in college wasting a ton of my parents' money. I should have never been there because I didn't really take it very seriously. And I got started working at a senior living community in our town, Greencroft. It's a pretty large place, 1,200 residents on the campus, 500 and some staff. And I really found a place, long and short of it is I really found a place there. I enjoyed working in the maintenance department. I loved going into residents' apartments, into their room and fixing things, listening to their stories and all that kind of stuff. And one day, the CEO, and imagine how impressionable I was at 19 years old. The CEO of the organization, 500 and some employees, I wouldn't have even anticipated that the dude knew who I was, right? Came up and tapped me on the shoulder and he said, "I've been hearing good things about you." He said, "What do you want to do?" And I said, "I don't really have any idea what I want to do." And he said, "You ought to really think about getting into senior living." He said, "You have a natural ability to relate with people. You have a natural ability to lead people." And he said, "There's a lot of opportunity and we need more good people like you." Right? So that's story number one, which fed into me going back to college, getting my business degree, getting my nursing home administrator's license, which I've had for over 28 years. And I got a chance at that organization to be the healthcare administrator on their campus. 240-bed skilled nursing facility, subacute unit, all kinds of stuff. And I was 23 years old, and I had no idea what I was doing, right? It was like the fire hose was open, and I just had my mouth open trying to understand what the heck was going on and how I should react to those kind of things. And I had the building was broken up into 5 separate units, and so we had a clinical nurse manager for each of those units. They reported to the director of nursing, who reported to me. And for some reason, one of the unit managers came into my office one day and said, "Jeremy, I want to fire," I don't remember the person's name. She was a CNA or STNA, depending on what you call them in your state, but she was a nursing assistant. "I want to fire so-and-so." I don't know why she didn't go to the DON, why she came to me, but I want to fire her. And that was back in the days of, in the 90s, back in the days of doing the 90-day assessment, right? Evaluation, and if they did well, they got to stay, and if they didn't do well, it was our opportunity to get rid of them, right? If you were involved back then in human resources related things, you understand that concept. And so she says, "I want to fire her." And I said, "Well, why do you want to fire her?" And she said, "Well, she's not really providing good resident care. Her coworkers don't really like her. She's not very reliable. She's got a bad attitude," all that kind of stuff. And so I said, "Well, of course, where is she at in her 90-day period?" "Well, she's got a little bit of time." And I said to her, "Well, we're not going to fire her." I said, "We got to at least let her get to her 90 days. And she said, she was mad, and she walked out of the office and said, "Okay." She came back to me exactly at 90 days. Exactly, and said, "Jeremy, I want to fire her." And I said, "Shawana," I said, "you know, I didn't ask you this the first time. I should have asked it to you, but I'm going to ask it to you now." I said, "What conversations did you have with that person about her performance?" She looked at me with this stupid look, and her dumbfounded look, I shouldn't say stupid, dumbfounded look, and she said, "I haven't talked to her at all." I said, "So help me understand here. She's been here for 90 days, providing bad care for residents, not being a good team member, and you're now wanting to fire her." I said, "First of all, you've allowed her to provide bad care for people that are paying a lot of money to be here. You've allowed her to be a bad teammate, right, for 90 days. And secondly, what opportunity have you given her to improve?" And she kind of looked at me still dumbfounded. And so I told her, I said, "You're going to go have a conversation with her. You're going to sit down with her and try to find out why she's not doing a good job and what support she needs from you or from me or from her team members to do a good job. And you're going to set some expectations, and then at that point when she doesn't reach those expectations over a period of time, you can come back and ask me to fire her, and I'll give you my blessing if you've done all those things that I've asked you to do." Well, Shawana wasn't very happy with me, and she walked out the door pretty upset. The reason it's important related to this is that I realized at that moment, first of all, I wasn't doing well enough as a leader. I wasn't equipped to handle that kind of stuff. And I also realized that as an organization, we weren't investing enough in our people that were leading others to do their work either. We have this terrible thing in healthcare and senior living in particular, and maybe it goes beyond. Those of you that don't work in senior living, you can tell me if you want to. We take good people in their tactical positions and we put them into supervisory and management positions, and we expect them to succeed. And we don't understand the difference between being a good nurse who assesses people and passes pills versus what it takes to lead and manage others, right? And so that day was like my mind was blown, right? And I realized at that point I had to become a better leader, and I had to figure out a way of equipping them to be better leaders if we were going to make it through the mess that we were in. And the place was a mess. And so I spent my career working at trying to become a better leader myself, but also trying to equip others. And that's really what succession planning is all about, is equipping people. And so I'll talk a little bit how we can do that today. I would welcome questions, comments along the way. Nobody wants to listen to me talk for very long, so feel free to, it's a small group, we can have a conversation as much as me talking to you. So some objectives here, I won't really go through these, but I want you to, at least at the end of the day, I go to these things and I want to at least be able to take one thing back to my work, right? So, and I tell a lot of groups that if I don't give you anything meaningful that you can take back and utilize in your work, come talk to me afterwards, and I'll try to find something that's meaningful, whether it's on this topic or something else that you need help with, because if I don't provide anything meaningful for you, then I just ask you to waste an hour and 15 minutes of your time. So hopefully you come away with something that's meaningful. I want to talk about these words that are in our title, succession planning. What do you think of when you think of succession? What comes to mind? What words jump out at you right away?
Development.
Development, okay?
Continuity.
Continuity. Awesome. Are you supposed to hit each other or something like that when you say it at the same time? Other words that come to mind?
Sustainability.
Sustainability, okay? How many of those things do we want in our organization? All of them, right? Okay. So when we talk about succession, I'm thinking about, there's this idea of people sharing a specified characteristic and following one after the other. So what is it about our roles that we have within our organizations, and how do we make sure that we have people that can fill those roles, right? So that when you leave tomorrow, or whatever that day it is, there's somebody that's potentially capable in our organization of stepping into that role and being able to do the things that are important. It's also the action or process of inheriting a title or a position. So thinking about a person that starts in your organization, they may not start where they want to end up being. How do we help prepare them to actually be, or even potentially be something that they never even thought of? I never started that job at Greencroft in the maintenance department making $7.75 an hour thinking that I was going to become a nursing home administrator, right? Following one after the other without interruption. So that idea of continuity, right? How do we create continuity so that our organization continue to move forward? When an organization has a lot of turnover, a lot of people leaving, it stops progress, or it can stop progress that we're making on our strategic plan, on our initiatives that we have. It changes our culture. And so how do we foster internally developing these people that can step into new roles that can help us keep that continuity and that motion moving forward? The other word that we're using in this title is resiliency. Right? You guys have demonstrated a ton of resiliency over the last 2 years. What comes to mind when you think of that word resiliency? Steadfast. Strength. Longevity. Grit. Oh, that's a great word. It's a great word. Commitment, yeah. Good. So that's what we're really talking about. You guys have demonstrated it because you've been forced to demonstrate it through the pandemic, right? It was kind of brought upon us, and we're going to get out of that, and we were talking a little bit about how we don't want to necessarily fall back into our typical trends that we had before the pandemic. There's things that we started doing that are new and refreshing and probably better than what we were doing before, but there could be this tendency to kind of get back into this lull again, right? We need to continue to be resilient. The challenges aren't going to stop, right, in our organizations. COVID didn't miraculously solve our staffing problems, right? So we're still going to have those things moving forward that we need to focus on. So resiliency, the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties, toughness, right? How many of you would describe your organization as being tough, right? It's not probably typically something we think of, but we want to be tough. We want people that can manage difficult situations. And again, reducing turnover and having those people that are stepping into new roles, learning new things, are going to create that toughness versus always having to bring in new people that takes so long to ramp up to get indoctrinated into our organizations. The last one I want to focus on is planning. We talked about succession planning. And I only bring this up, we all know what a plan is, right? But in my work as a consultant, one of the things that we do a lot is what's called operations assessments. And we'll go into organizations and we'll talk to staff and we'll try to get a better handle on what are their processes and systems and how are they doing things, with the idea of us giving from our knowledge them recommendations on how they can improve their organization, whether it's financially, whether it's outcomes, whatever the case may be. And I can't tell you how often I'll say to them, what's your plan for recruiting staff? Well, we do this sometimes, we do that sometimes. I said, is it written down? No. And then I go ask somebody else, what's your plan for recruiting staff? And they tell me something the exact opposite of what the person was that I just talked to, right? Or I'll ask them about what's your retention plan? What's your strategic plan? And so why I'm saying, focusing on this just little inconsequential word is plan. If you want to do well at succession planning, you actually have to have it documented. You have to give thought to it and write it out. It needs to have its purpose stated, you need to have goals, you need to have action items that go with it. It needs to be measurable. And you have to review it and revise it along the way. It's not a static document, right? But you have to write it down.
Target dates.
What's that? Target dates, yeah, absolutely. Right? Because what happens is we get busy and then we start focusing on something else, and what we say is important all of a sudden is put off to the side. Right? So you have to have it written down. How are you going to develop people that can step into new roles? What's your purpose? How are you going to fund it? How are you going to measure whether it's working? How are you going to revise it if it's not? All that kind of stuff. So anything that's important in your organization has to be written down. You should have a recruitment plan, you should have a retention plan, you should have a succession plan, you should have a strategic plan. They all should be written. Okay? So I think of succession planning like this. It's an intentional effort for you to identify team members with high growth potential, provide opportunities for development, and empower engaged team members. All with the goal of preparing team members for new responsibilities and roles within the organization. Okay? That's what this is really, really about. I want to build a case for it. You know what 98% says? What that 98%, just as a guess. It's just a random number, right? So CLA, which is an accounting firm that does a lot of consulting work in senior living space, just did a survey of senior living providers across the country. 98% of them have very little hope that the labor pool is going to get any better in the near future. Right? 98%. I'd like to find actually the 2% of the people that actually said they think it will, right? Okay, but 98% agree that labor will be a challenge, right? And I can be very unpopular in a room like this, and I'll just tell you, pay is not going to solve your problem, right? You got to be in the game from a pay perspective, but it's not going to solve your problem, okay? 45%. Anybody know what that number is? Bureau of Labor Statistics calculates what's called a separation rate. That was the 2020 separation rate, meaning that 45% of the workforce across the country left their job in 2020. 45%. So how many employees do you have in your organization?
350.
350. That means about 160 are going to leave in the next year. Right? 160 of those, imagine that. 4,000. Anybody know what that represents? Cost of turnover, right? Now this is not just for, this is for CNAs, right? This is for a nursing assistant. They say that it costs anywhere from $3,000 to $5,000 every time a CNA walks out your door. I think that's comparable to any of the other industry, any of the other fields that might be represented in this room or within CHHSM, right? When we hire somebody at $15 to $20 to $30 an hour, we can assume that it's going to cost us $4,000 to $5,000 every time one of those people walks out. So I was doing some consulting work with a senior living community in Iowa, and they told me they had a recruiting problem. And I said, okay, let's look at this. So we started getting out numbers, and to realize that they didn't have a recruiting problem, they had a retention problem. If they could have saved 50% of the people that had left, they would have all their positions filled. We calculated the cost of that turnover, and we were talking about $250,000 in a year. And they would have told me they have no money to do succession planning or put money into help growth and development of their team or give them better benefits. And I said, yes, it is. It's right here, $250,000. Do you have to pay it up front to get the reward later on? Yes, absolutely. But you have money. You're throwing it out the door by letting people leave. 4.9 years. Anybody want to guess what that is?
Average tenure?
Mm-hmm. Average tenure
At what level?
across all of the labor in the U.S. Okay? The number goes up in healthcare. I mean, the number goes down in healthcare, I'm sorry. In health and human service related fields, it goes down. Lower paying jobs, the number goes down. This is just across the board, 4.9 years. And I can guarantee you, we do executive searches, I can guarantee you that number is going to go down. I have to completely look at resumes differently than I used to 3 to 5 years ago, because I used to throw out any resume that had the job hopper on it. You guys have looked at those before?
Yep.
I can't do it anymore. 90% of the candidates that I'm looking at are job hoppers. I have to keep them, and I have to ask them why they're job hopping, and trying to figure out whether there's a chance that this organization might be the place that they'll stay longer than 18 months or 24 months. So this number is going to go down. So I hope that that gives us an idea of how important it is that once we get people in the door, we need to do whatever we can to try to keep them, right? And Nikki was talking, I was so interested, I could have listened to her talk about a lot of different subjects a long time, but her whole concept of, from an HR perspective, about how much we value, how much we view our worth and our well-being and our life through our work was fascinating to me, right? And so that's our job, is to not our job, but that's our task, is to figure out how to do that better, and how to understand that people are coming to work and they need to feel valued, right? And one way to do that, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, is through growth and development. So how do you equip your organization, right? This is really what your task is, or what your board's is there any board members in the room for any organization, or are you all working? A couple board members. So a board's responsibility is to make sure that the organization is equipped, right? In various ways, and then by extension that becomes the CEO's responsibility, because the board hires you as the CEO, if you're a CEO in the room, right? The one and only person that a board hires is the CEO, okay? And so they need to be sure, and you need to be sure, that there's a strategic plan in place and being implemented, right? We need to have boards that are engaged and committed to their own development, right? Boards are a mess at times, right? And so that hurts our chance of being successful as an organization if we don't have well-equipped boards that are functioning at a very, very high level. The board and the CEO need to be in sync at all times, right? I mean, we work in organizations where, I just worked with an organization in California where the CEO viewed the world one way and the board viewed the world another way, and it was not going well. And who suffers from that? Right? It's the organization, it's the team, it's the seniors that were being served in that environment, because there was this disconnect, right? And so we have to make sure that they're in sync. You need to make sure that operational performance is steady, and you need to have high trust between the CEO, right? And that's just this foundational thing that we think is really, really important, regardless of whether there's turnover or not, is there has to be those things. And the reason is it benefits those you serve in the team and makes the organization more attractive to future executives or for future team members, right? When we do executive searches, the 2 or 3 themes that we hear from people that are interested potentially are, they want to know, how is the board functioning? What's that relationship like? They want to know how the organization is doing financially. Are they stable and solid? And what's the vision for the future? Are they willing to do things differently? Are they stuck in the mud and going nowhere? Is there a vision for something different? And of course now the 4th one that we didn't have before is, how are they doing with COVID? Right? New executives want to know. So creating this strategic readiness as an organization between the board, CEO, and on down is ultimately what's going to help attract new people to your organization. If those things aren't in place, if there's not a strategy to move forward, if there's not solid financials, if there's not a good response to COVID and some of those other things, people don't want to be involved in that. And there's too many jobs out there for them to choose from to go into a messy situation. Now, there are some people that really like messy situations. They actually seek them out, but not normal. So to equip your organization, you have to be working at the board, CEO, and on down is how are you cultivating future leaders? How are you identifying people within your organization? And it has to be an expectation of the board, and it has to be then passed on down to the CEO to carry out, right? And at the very minimum, at the executive level, how many of you are a CEO in the room? I know a couple of you are. Your job is to make sure that you have one or two people in your organization that can take over for you, right? You need one or two people that you would be able to go to the board and say, if I get hit with a truck tomorrow, this person is who you want to, they can run the organization. Or when you go and turn your resignation letter in, I think you ought to really give consideration to this person. They're ready for this, okay? And I can't tell you how many searches we do and we first start talking for CEOs and we talk to the board. Are there any internal candidates? Nope. We aren't cultivating people internally, right? We aren't finding the right people and giving them opportunities to grow and develop and be ready to be the next VP of operations or VP of HR or CEO. And then we're going to take this crapshoot approach at trying to hopefully find somebody out there that's going to come and have the skills that they need and also fit into our culture, right? And I'm actually working with an organization right now that has come to this realization that they're probably going to be looking for a CEO for every 3 to 5 years, and they don't want to do it anymore because they've just had a miserable experience trying to find a new CEO that's equipped to handle their organization. And so they're trying to grapple with what are the alternatives if they can't find somebody that's going to stay for any period of time and have to constantly go through that process. So your overall goal with this is to enhance and strengthen the leadership capacity of the whole organization, right? So I'm going to talk a little bit just about a couple of points related to exactly to chief executive transition. One is that your board should have a written plan in place about succession, right? It should have a plan in there that says if the CEO goes out tomorrow for 25 days, this is what we're going to do for that period of time. Here's the person internally that's going to run the organization. These are the steps that we need to take to put them into place so that they can sign documents, if they can make decisions, all that kind of stuff. It should include also a plan for what happens if it goes over 30 days. Because now you're talking about a completely different ballgame, right? It could extend to 2 months, to 3 months, to 4 months. Is there a different strategy that you want to employ? Can that person that you put into place for 30 days, can they handle their load plus the CEO load for 4 months? Or 5 months if that's what it's going to be. And if the answer is no, then you might have to seek an interim that could come in and be the CEO so that person can go back to their role. And then there needs to be a long-term succession plan, right? You come in tomorrow and you return in your resignation to the board. That should trigger a plan. This is what we're going to do to replace, remind me of your name. Michelle. This is what we're doing as a board, okay? Because at the CEO level, transitions create huge amounts of anxiety, right? The board becomes anxious right away because all of a sudden they realize how vulnerable they are because they don't really know the organization day in and day out, right? It creates anxiety for the team. Whether that CEO is liked or not, it creates anxiety. They could be the worst person in the world. When I became the healthcare administrator in that setting, I was the assistant first, and I worked for the worst person in the world as the administrator. Everybody hated him. But there was still anxiety when he was fired. Because the question becomes, what now? Who's next? Right? Are they going to bring in some guy from the outside or gal from the outside that we don't know, and they're going to change our world? Right? People wanted me, not because I was any good, but because I was known. right? But there was anxiety, even though he was the worst human being I've ever worked for. And I say that, no joke, okay? So it creates anxiety, and the one way a board can help make sure that that anxiety doesn't get too high is to have a plan. If you, Michelle, resign tomorrow, if that board can communicate to your team and the people you serve fairly quickly, this is what we're doing, it automatically lowers the anxiety. It says this group of people knows what they're doing, right? When you stumble out of the gate on something like that, they lose trust in you as a group right away, right? That if the board doesn't have a documented plan. It needs to have, and we have templates we'd happy to help anybody with, about announcements and ongoing communication plan, right? I tell boards, you have to at least say something even if you don't have all the details. Michelle's leaving at the end of the month. We are going to implement our succession plan. We'll be meeting next week. We will get back with you when we've made some important decisions. Most boards would like to say nothing at all till they figure it all out, and then there's this vacuum that all the staff and the people that you serve can speak into and make up any narrative that they want. Michelle was pushed out. You know, she wasn't treated well. They're probably going to bring in some bozo from the outside. I mean, whatever the narrative is, right? Because you're not filling the space with anything. They can do whatever, they can fill it with whatever they want. So at least have a communication plan, even if it's just generally acknowledging the person is leaving and that a plan is being put into place. And the plan also should say, how are we going to do the search? At least in loose terms, right? Are we going to do it on our own? Are we forming a search committee? Who's the search committee going to be? If we are going to not do it on our own, do we have a particular search firm that we want to contact and work with? Do we want to put out an RFP? Again, it's all about that pre-planning, so when it actually happens, they're rolling out stuff instead of having to figure it out at the get-go, right? Instead of taking all of that time. We worked with one of our members had a plan for their CEO's transition 5 years in advance, and it talked about what would happen in 30 days, what would happen in 60 days, and what would happen when he permanently retired. And I was going out there in March of 2020, right? You can imagine what March of 2020 was like, right? And I was going to go out there and help them because their CEO was not doing well health-wise, not related to COVID, from something else. And he called and he says, could you come out and just be an extra hands on the ground, help the team out, you know, help us make some decisions because I'm just not performing as well as I should and I'm taking time off because I don't feel good. And I said, sure. So I was in my car. I had like 6 weeks worth of stuff in my car. I told my wife I don't know when I'll be home because she didn't want me to come home because it was in that moment where I could bring COVID home and she didn't, you know, we didn't know what was going on. She didn't want me to bring it back. And he calls me and he says, Jeremy, he says, we're implementing our succession plan. You're going to be the CEO when you get here. He took 10 weeks off. He finally realized that he was not capable because of his health to run the organization. But the plan specifically said MHS Consulting will appoint an interim CEO in the case of an emergency. And they will also do the permanent search once the guy retires. But the anxiety level went way down. The decision was made like this. The board felt comfortable in allowing him to take his leave because they had a plan, right? And so it's just really important to be thinking and thoughtful about what that looks like. Any questions, comments so far? Yes?
I was just thinking, Jeremy, you know, the pandemic has really initiated this massive wave of retirements and resignations, particularly in healthcare industry. You know, how are organizations preparing for that? And is that just really kind of what the next wave is in terms of leadership transitions?
We aren't prepared for it, and we aren't. Just to be honest, I mean, that's the short answer, is I don't find many organizations that are, and part of it is because we're not doing a good enough job of developing people internally to step into new roles. I mean, we're used to, at least in certain key positions, just saying when this person leaves, we're going to go out and hire somebody else. Well, going out and hiring somebody else is more and more challenging all the time, right? And so I think the short answer to that, Kristen, question is that we aren't really prepared for it. I do think that there's going to be some rebound, right? I mean, the studies show that there are going to be some people that will start entering back into the workforce over time as they become more comfortable. But just like Ziegler talked about yesterday, you know, we're running out of bodies, so to speak, in terms of being able to fill our labor, you know, our jobs, the longer it goes, right? So being strategic about not only how to be efficient in our organizations and saying, hey, I may not be able to have all these positions in the future, I gotta find ways of doing things more streamlined and maybe eliminate a position or two, I think is gonna be critical. And I think also just, again, getting good people in the door and figuring out a way of keeping them so that you don't have to replace them is gonna be absolutely critical. And that's against the trend, right? Because no offense to millennials, but millennials just aren't going to stay anywhere very long. I have millennial kids, so I can say that without. But I also know that I remember being 23 at that retirement community and people were saying, well, you're a Gen Xer, your generation's gonna ruin the world, right? So I'm not saying that millennials, they're just gonna change the world. They're not gonna ruin the world, and we have to be willing to adapt and
But
adjust
there's
to it.
just not as many of them.
No. And again, their objectives are just different than yours and mine, right? I mean, the way they view work is different. The way they view a profession is different. It's not wrong. We just have to adapt and adjust. So the final thing I'll just say about executive transition is that as part of this is, you know, as you think about it, if it's actually happening in your organization, we need to make sure that we have good conversation between the board and the outgoing executive about what is this person going to do before they leave, right? Because you become a lame duck the minute you say I'm retiring, right, or I'm resigning. And so being very clear about what you want this person to do in that short period of time or whatever that period of time is before they actually exit is really, really important. Hey, we started this initiative. I need you to make sure that you do this before you go with that so that it's in a better place, right? Or we're in the middle of securing a loan. It'd be great if we could have that loan so that the new person doesn't have to focus on that when it comes in. You also, though, have to be very careful as a board at not allowing that person to do things that aren't maybe in the best interest of the organization, but it's just because that's what that person wants to do. And no offense to the CEOs in the room. I mean, we worked with an organization that the CEO was literally hell-bent on starting a home health agency that we had said was not financially viable. And the board wanted to let her do it in her last couple of months as being a legacy program for her. Well, that's just not smart. Right? Why hamstring the organization just because this person needs a legacy program on the way out the door? Right? So to be upfront about what's important and not important. You got to be right up front about what role the executive's going to play in the search process. And if you want to ask me my opinion about it, I know you do want to know my opinion. The search CEO plays no role whatsoever.
Right.
And that's really hard for CEOs because they think they know the best for their organization and they think that they just do. They should play no part in it whatsoever.
Jeremy,
Yes.
what's your thought of like the rest of the executive team?
They shouldn't either. They shouldn't either. What we will do in our searches is that we will create an opportunity for that senior team to meet the identified candidate before they get announced to the public. Sometimes that's before full approval from the board, so the search committee may work it down and say, okay, here's our identified candidate, we're going to propose this person to the board and hopefully get their approval on this person. And then at that point, a lot of times we'll bring in the senior team just to meet that person. But that's for a couple reasons. One is that depending on where that person is at, the candidate, they may not want it to be public. So the more you open the door in terms of who those people are that know it, the likelihood that it gets out and that may damage that person. The other part about it is that we're all humans, right? And we all have our own needs. And so you bring that senior team in and you tell them you're going to help us make this decision, and 3 out of the 4 senior team want this person and the other person wants that person and the board chooses somebody else, you've just set up a terrible scenario for that new person.
I just had a colleague that was part of their process, and I thought that was odd. He was like, I hear it's an up and coming best practice, and I'm like, that sounds like a horrible practice. But so I wasn't sure if something had changed out there.
No, I like to do it in other positions within the organization, you know, letting people interview with peers and things like that, but I don't like to do it at the executive level at all. Yes?
Jeremy, do you have any thoughts about
the transition time and, between an executive and the new executive and the old executive, how long that should be, or is there any standard way you think about that?
Less than a week,
Is that right?
Really?
3 days. And that boards hate it when I say that.
Why do you say that?
Why do I say it? For a number of reasons. One is it's a very awkward period of time. And it's actually not creating a keen environment for anybody, right? You got this old person that is having potentially a hard time with letting go, right? Depending on the circumstances. I mean, you know, if the person's been there for 20 years, it's hard for them to let it go. It's hard to see somebody else come in and potentially change things, all that kind of stuff, right? You got the new person that's excited about coming into that role, wanting to learn and get to know people and, you know, make their mark, so to speak, but yet they've got this other person that's still there. You got staff that are really in this awkward position. I mean, who do I go to? Do I go to Michelle, the current CEO, or do I go to the new person stepping in for this decision? When does that transition happen, right, along the way? And then the final thing I tell boards is, you're hiring a person that's supposed to be capable of running this organization, right? And so why do they need somebody else to hold their hand for more than a week, right? There may be some key people that you want that outgoing person to introduce them to, some things, you know. What I'd actually rather see happen is have that CEO be willing to be on standby. Maybe develop a contract with that person and say, hey, for $200 an hour, would you be willing to consult with the new CEO on issues that come up as they're getting started? Right? That puts it in the new CEO's space to say, do I need this person or do I not? Instead of having it be forced upon them that this person's going to be around for a long time helping them. And again, there's always those situations where it'll work, right? And it's okay. I'm talking about what I think is best practice and what I think is most helpful the majority of the time. Are there certain circumstances where 2-3 weeks, a month might be helpful? Sure. And our job as we do this work with clients is to try to help them think this through and ask the right questions and figure out a strategy that will work for everybody. But our standard that we recommend is under a week. Yes.
Just one more follow if I could, just real quick, because I'm in the middle of this. Is it the current exec's responsibility though? In our organization, we're going to have a cascade of openings in upper management.
Okay.
Would you, one of the things we're trying to think through is it my responsibility to make sure before I leave in a year that we have all those key positions filled? Or should that new person be able to create their own team?
Yeah,
And
that's a great question.
I want to leave the agency in good shape, but
That's a great question.
what I thought was a good team, maybe that person have a different view.
Each situation is different, and I don't say that just as a way of escaping the question without giving an answer, right? But I mean, I think one of the things that we do well as a consulting agency is to try to adapt and adjust and understand that every circumstance is different and make sure that we're tailoring our approach and our help and all that kind of stuff to that situation. And so I try to stay away from absolutes, right? A couple things to think about. One would be is how is the organization going to handle and manage those vacancies if you don't fill them, right? I mean, if you're going to hurt the organization by not filling them, then I think you need to go ahead and fill those roles. I think you need to make sure that you let other people be part of that process instead of it just being the CEO interviewing those people and making those decisions, because you are leaving, right? And so you need to be thinking about, can my team work with these people that we're hiring, and in creating some accountability for that team to say, hey, I was part of this, it just wasn't the guy that walked out the door that hired these clowns, right? I mean, there's really some, I mean, I'm not saying you would do that, but the minute something goes wrong with one of them, then you become the target, right? Whereas if you involve them, are there other approaches? Can you hire an interim? You know, if the organization can't survive without that person for a period of time, that position filled, is there a way to put somebody in there as an interim to allow that new person? And then it's also about timing, right? I mean, a year is one thing. When you get within 2 to 3 months and then you're leaving and this position becomes open, I would really, really encourage you to try to figure out a way of making it through that last 2 to 3 months and letting that new person. Now, you also can, and we've seen organizations, we've helped organizations do this, you can start the recruiting process before you're actually out the door. And we've actually done that, where the new CEO comes in and will say, you have this vice president of finance position open, here's 3 or 4 identified candidates that we have. And they can just start they can start with interviewing them and they can be ready to go. Because that could take 2 to 3 months to get to that point, right? So you're just speeding up the process, but you're not making any of the decisions. You're letting that new person do that.
That makes sense,
Yeah.
thank you.
The last thing a board needs to think about is how they're going to honor and celebrate the person going out the door, right? There was obviously a lot of thought today, this week about how to honor Michael on the way out the door. And I think that that's really, really important. Incoming, think about how that person's going to be welcomed to the organization, oriented to the community, what's the orientation plan, and how will the person be supported in the first year, right? And boards are negligent at this. I'm sorry, they're just really negligent. And I understand, right? They're volunteers, they have their own life. But again, we all know that people become invested and become trained in the first 60 to 90 days, right? And so what are we doing as a board to help make sure that that person feels welcomed? They have the support and the resources they need. You're talking to them about, hey, how is it going, right? How are you and the team developing relationships? Where are the struggles for you? What are you identifying that maybe needs to be changed, right? And really being deliberate as a board with the CEO. The CEO may or may not feel comfortable with going to the board with some of those things, and so the board needs to be opening up those conversations with the new CEO, right? We are also at the place where we're basically telling boards they need to hire a coach for CEOs, whether they're seasoned as a CEO or not. And this is not about generating business for us necessarily, or for job coaches out there or leadership coaches. It's just there's so much going on for a CEO stepping into an organization. Having somebody externally that they can process things with, we think just increases their likelihood of success, right? So the new CEO steps in and all of a sudden they realize that the board is like split. They need somebody to talk to. Who are they going to talk to about how do I work with this board? Right? And so having a coach, having that person that they can talk with is really, really important. Or what do you think? I've got 5 people on my senior team. I think 3 of them need to go. How do I handle that? Right? Somebody just to talk through that stuff. A board is not equipped to talk through that stuff with somebody, right? Not typically.
No.
Right? So we always say they should have a coach in that first year. We have a succession planning toolkit on our website. Our website is mhsonline.org. I would encourage you, if you have interest in it, it talks about a lot of the things that I just talked about and some even more. I would encourage you, if you're interested in downloading, to do it very soon. We've been historically really great at just giving away the tools that they're kind of developed for members, but we just give them away. We put them on our website. But we are going through a rebranding and rebranding effort, and with a new website, and we're probably going to have a member portal where some of this stuff is going to be put behind the wall, so to speak. If you're not an MHS member, you'd have to buy it. So there's a new CEO toolkit, there's a succession planning toolkit, there's some other resources on there. So if you're interested, feel free to go and download it and use it however you want to. So a couple things about succession planning in general in your organization, whether it's for the CEO or otherwise. One is, you need to do a key position analysis, and you were talking about this a little bit, and I told you I would share a story. I worked for a senior living system. We had 7 retirement communities across 3 states, and the board went to the CEO and says, we want you to start doing some intentional work around succession planning. And so one of the things that we start, and what they wanted was they wanted identification of what the needs of the organization would be across the system over the next 5 to 10 years. And they also wanted to know who are the people internally that should have their shoulders tapped for particular growth and development. Who are the stars, so to speak, in the organization, right? We all have them. And so what we did was we have about 100 in that system. We had about 125 people at a manager, director level and above, right? And so we went out and we did an assessment to say, how long have they been in the organization? How long have they been in the current role? And then what is their age, right? What's the guess for how long they may be here before they retire? I said 125, right? over 50, closer to 75% of those people were within 5 to 8 years of retirement just based on their age. That was mind-boggling to us as an organization to think of the fact that within the next 5 years, that group of 125 people that are making key decisions every single day and are leading our teams could be gone, right? So you need to start with that kind of analysis. What are those, and it's not just manager or supervisor positions, we also within our organizations have key positions that are just hard to recruit for, right? They may have some technical expertise that the person needs to have, there may be some specific education the person needs to have. So it's not just managers and supervisors or senior level people. Try to identify any difficult jobs to recruit for that you have to invest time in or that person has to have. And then figure out, how many of them do you think you're going to need to replace? Right, to give you some sense for how quick your efforts need to be and how intentional your efforts, and it's going to shape what you do. Again, also find the stars in your organization and make sure they know their stars and make sure that they know that you care about their growth and development and you see new things for them. Right? So that they have a reason to stay. They're not out there looking on Indeed and all those other places where there's a million jobs out there that might be enticing for them, right? Figure out what the training needs of that group is. What do they need from a leadership development, from a technical skill development, and figure out a way to provide it. Everybody should have an individual development plan in this group, right? What's the training they need? What help do they need to become better managers, better leaders? And it should be talked about between them and their supervisor, right? Here's where you're at. This is what you maybe would need to do to be able to step into that new position at some point. There's the gap, and this is how we're going to help you figure out how to close that gap, right? For everybody in that group. You need to designate financial resources for this, right? So it's going to cost you money. And it's going to cost you time. And I get tired of hearing managers and supervisors say, I don't have time to talk to people about their job performance. We have to start at the top, demanding that our managers and supervisors are sitting down with people and having conversations about their growth and their development. Because otherwise they're going to leave. Right? There's no more excuse for we don't have time.
They're doing the human shuffle next time.
Do you guys want to get up and dance around? And then again, as we always want to do, we want to monitor progress and success, change course where we need to, right? But start with that position analysis. Try to get a sense for, in your organization, I think you said, right, that you're the youngest person on your senior team, people are 60 and over, right? I mean, there you go, right? Like, there's the place that you have to start, is to figure out, do you have strength? And as part of that analysis that the board asked us to do at that organization was, we had to be able to say, in any of those positions where we anticipated transition in 5 years, was there somebody underneath them that was a natural person to step into that position? Was there a bench underneath them, so to speak, right? And unfortunately, in many cases, the answer was no to that question. We weren't doing anything to identify, here's a nurse, they could be a DON someday. This is what we need to do to get them to be a DON, right? We weren't doing anything. We needed to be more intentional about that. I find it really, really interesting. So I don't know if you've ever read the book Work of Leaders. It's a good book. It's based on, I'll say more a little bit about it later, but it's a good book. They talk to thousands of managers and supervisors across the world in their research about what makes an effective manager, what makes an effective leader. And they ask them a bunch of different questions. And 86% of the people wanted more technical knowledge, and 81% of those people wanted greater leadership skills. Right? So I know that it's hard for us to step away from our work sometimes. Hey, I've got so many things to do. I don't know how I'm going to ever do this training. I feel bad about taking people off the floor or out of their workspace to be able to do this kind of stuff. They want it. They want it done well, right? They don't want poor leadership training or poor technical skill training, but they really, really want it, right? And so it behooves us as organizations to figure out how to provide it. You probably can't see this one really, really well, but I do also think as we think about, there's a couple of factors as we think about growth and development and succession planning. We have 5 generations in our workplace right now, and don't be offended if you're in the oldest one that I didn't put you there. It just happens to be that your needs and desires are a little different than the other 4. But I find it amazing as you look at these generations, even though they're different. Baby boomers, what do they want? Leadership coaching. What do Gen X want? Leadership coaching. What do millennials want? Leadership coaching. What does Gen Z want? Leadership coaching. Every single one of them. I mean, we would all naturally say that they're really, really different, and they don't want the same thing. There's a common denominator through all of them. They want leadership coaching. They want to be better at their jobs and working with others. Sure, boomers want to be mentors. They need to find goals and deadlines. Gen Xers, don't disrespect me, right? You better show me respect for the skills and my abilities, otherwise I'm going to be irritated, right? Millennials want to be judged on results. Don't give them anything else other than, am I getting the job done? If I'm getting the job done and I'm getting the results, I'm successful. And then Gen Z, which is actually the majority of our workforce right now and will continue to be such, think about this as you think about growth and development. They want non-traditional learning. How many of you still make your staff sit in a leadership program where somebody just stands in front of them and talks to them? Right? How many of you are using technology to train them? How many of you are actually out in the workspace teaching, guiding, coaching, training, where they get to hands-on do the things that you're trying to teach them to do? Because if you're not, they've tuned out like 30 seconds into it. And I can tell you that, again, I have millennial kids. Right? So I'm showing you this for 2 reasons. One is we have to figure out how each of these generations want that growth and development, but they all want it. Right? There's not one that wants it more than others. So I'm going to talk just a little bit about a couple tools, and there's like hundreds of thousands of tools out there, but things that we like to use we do leadership training, we do individual coaching, things that we like to utilize. We like to use the DISC in our leadership as a starting point for our leadership coaching and our leadership training. You can use the Enneagram, you can use Myers-Briggs, I don't care what you use. We happen to be prescribed a DISC. It blew my mind. It took 23 years old when I did it for the first time, and I've been obsessed with it ever since. And we're an authorized partner, so we can do this for your leaders, whoever you want. But what it's really about is building that personal awareness, and that's where we really need to start, right? We need to, as we start training and developing people and help grooming them for future roles, make sure they really understand who they are, right? What are their strengths? What are their weaknesses? How do they react under stress? How do they react to other people, right? Different types of people than them. How do they build relationships? Where do they struggle in building relationships? Because leading is all about getting a group of people to go from one place to another along with the person that's their leader, right? So understanding that is really, really important. And so the DISC can be a way for that person to start better understanding who they are. And again, use the Enneagram if you want, use Myers-Briggs. I don't care, unless you want us to use a DISC with you. But that's one tool that we think is really, really vital when you really start to think intentionally about developing people within your organization. We also have access to this program called Checkpoint 360. That gives an opportunity for you as a leader to say, I want to know how people perceive my leadership, right? You can have your peers, you can have your direct reports, you can have people across the organization assess you. You get to assess yourself, right? Again, it's all about creating that awareness of where we're good, where we're bad, and it becomes a starting point for conversations with people about, here's where you are, this is where we see you needing to go to be able to be successful not only in your current role, but in your, a future role. This is what we want you to really work on and focus on. And we recognize how hard it is for managers and leaders to have those conversations, because we always are worried, how is Darlene, you're really not doing a very good job in this area. How is that person going to interpret that and accept that, right? A tool like this can be a non-threatening way of starting to have that conversation, right? So again, you can use all kinds of different tools, but how do you begin the process? And it's really about identifying, again, where the person's at and where they need to go and making it part of their development plan. Talk about a couple other things that I think are important related to succession planning is we need to have career ladders within our organization. How many of you work in senior living? Handful of you, right? Okay. we've been talking about career ladders since 1995. How many organizations have them? Hardly any. We are not doing well at this at all. I don't understand it. I've been part of it. I still don't understand why I didn't do a better job at it. But a person that starts as a dishwasher does not want to be a dishwasher the rest of their life. How do we help them identify where the growth paths are to other jobs? A CNA, a nursing assistant, doesn't probably want to be a CNA the rest of their life. Maybe they don't want to necessarily be a nurse either. But is there growth paths or there new roles and responsibilities that they can have other than just being a CNA that will give them more satisfaction in their job and potentially greater pay? Qualified medication assistants are one of those ways in healthcare that we can do that, right? There's programs that states have that takes a CNA and over a pretty short period of time allows them to pass meds. And I still talk to staff, I still talk to executives and organizations that say, I don't trust my CNAs to do that. Why would I ever have a program like that? Okay, I guess I'll differ in opinion with those people, but they're also missing an opportunity to grow and develop people and give them a path for something other than what they are doing right now, right? And you're also telling the people you don't trust them.
Yeah,
Right.
right.
Right? So how do we build career ladders within our organization so people understand when they start one place, there's an opportunity to grow into something else, okay? Internships, we don't do a good job in health and human services by, in my opinion, at developing internship programs. Going out to colleges in our communities and trying to figure out a way of bringing those students in. I mean, I ended up at this organization when I was 19 only because a friend of mine quit school, went and got a job there, and he came and showed up at my dorm right before summer started and said, hey, I found this great place to work. They need one more person to do this project in the summer. You ought to come work there. Right? There wasn't anybody from Greencroft coming to Goshen College talking about the great opportunities in senior living. Right? And you're going to have to pay people to do an internship. I'm tired of seeing these internship programs that pay people nothing. Right? Pay them. If you structure it in such a way and make it meaningful and purposeful, it's worth whatever you pay them. $3,000 for the summer or whatever it might be, right? So develop ways in which you can get people involved. They don't have any idea what the career opportunities are in senior living or behavioral health or mental health or our small rural health. I mean, there's so many rural jobs in nonprofits and people don't know enough about them. Internships is a way of driving that interest. Diversity, and I won't even spend a lot of time talking about this because people here this week have talked about diversity way better than I ever could. So I won't even begin to try. I would be almost embarrassed to talk about it, right? But I will just tell you, we are doing a woeful job in healthcare and human services at creating environments for people of color and minorities to feel comfortable and to give them opportunities. Study after study after study is showing just how bad we are doing in that realm, right? And we are missing an opportunity. Ultimately, we're missing what's right, doing what's right, but we're just missing an opportunity in a tight labor market to figure it out. And we have to train people. I can remember, this is last thing I'll say about diversity. I remember when I was 24 and I was still at that building and the DON came to me and said, I need you to go talk to Mrs. Jones. And I said, okay, what do I need to talk to Mrs. Jones about? Well, she had one of our STNAs or CNAs in Indiana. She told me the name, I can't remember it. And she doesn't want her anymore because she's black. And I'm trying to tell her that I can't guarantee that there won't be a black person that takes care of her. I need you as the administrator to go talk to her. Well, the first thing is I was really nervous. What do I say? I'm 24 years old. I don't know what to say, right? But also on top of that, what I wanted to scream was that black STNA was better caregiver than half the, whatever. I mean, you're judging that person based on the color of their skin, not the care that they were providing, right? But I wasn't equipped. I'm still not equipped to help deal with, inequities in our society and in our workplaces and all that kind of stuff. And so I have to figure out a way of becoming better, and we have to equip our teams. Otherwise, we won't be a place where people of color or different age or different genders or whatever feel comfortable because we're not open to that, right? I mean, senior living has gotten better in my 28 years in it, but I still go to conferences and I'm still amazed at how many white old males are there. No offense to the white males in the room, right? But I'm in that group, right? When I was 23, the CEO of the organization took me to Washington, D.C. for the Spring Leading Age Conference, right, which is thousands of people. And I walked into the room. He was the Leading Age National Board Chair, so he invited me to come along. And I walked into the room and I was dumbfounded. There wasn't a woman in the room. There wasn't anybody under 50 years old. And here I was, this 23-year-old kid, scared out of my mind to be in that room. There's nobody like me, right? And I have it easy because I'm white and I'm male, but I still felt uncomfortable because I was like a fish out of water, right? So we have to do better. I think it's something that, and I would agree with Nikki, it's an engagement thing, right? There's the other societal part of inequity that we have to deal with, but internally I think it can be something that I'm a big fan of project teams. We are really, really bad at being top-down in terms of our decision-making and only grabbing certain people at times to work on projects, right? And so project teams are a way of giving people say in how we do it, but it opens their ideas to possibilities. It grows and develops them as people. It's just a unique opportunity to get people out of their normal everyday roles and give them a chance for growth and development opportunities, right? I worked for an organization where I started to implement doing this, and at first I had a hard time getting people to want to be part of them. And after I did it for a while, I had people coming to me and saying, Jeremy, why aren't you ever picking me? Why aren't you picking me? I want to be on one of these things. And they were the people that I would have never thought cared 2 bits. They just wanted to come do their job and walk out the door, right? But it gets people engaged and involved, and it helps them to be part of things beyond their typical role. So what are some of the outcomes? Increased engagement, reduced turnover, lower costs, greater stability, stronger culture, better outcomes. And all of that really ties to our mission, right? If we get all of that, then we can focus on our mission. And we can make sure that it's sound and solid and we're doing a good job of caring for the people or providing services for the people that we need to. Any questions? We're actually at time. I heard them clapping over there, so I assume we're at time.
It's very timely for me, very, very helpful. Thank you.
Any questions? Yeah, questions? Yeah, thanks for coming. And I looked at, I got to give Mike a hard time though. I looked and he put me on the last day. I thought, I know people leave the last day. They won't even be around. So I don't know whether he was trying to say something about, he put me at the end instead of on one of the earlier days, but I have to give him a hard time about that. But I appreciate you guys coming and reach out anytime. Yeah, my email address, telephone number are down there if you have any interest at any time having a conversation.